Alright, today's lecture is on the Industrial Revolution. And so when we're talking about the Industrial Revolution, we're going to first start off talking about the beginning stages of the Industrial Revolution, where it happened and why it's important, and what inventions are involved. So here we go. So, the significance of the Industrial Revolution, as mentioned right here, if you were a Greek or a Roman person and you traveled in time to the 1700s, they would look pretty much the same. There wasn't really that much of a difference. Agriculture and technology was pretty much unchanged for about 2,000 years. And then the Industrial Revolution occurred, and it's going to make human life and change human life and the world around us and how we perceive things in such a dramatic way. And it says here that it was created in the last 250 years than in the previous 2,500 years of known human history. So more was created in a 250-year time span than all in the other 2,500 years previous to that. That's how important the Industrial Revolution is. So what was the Industrial Revolution? Well, the Industrial Revolution was a fundamental change the way goods were produced from human labor to machines. Now, that's kind of a novel concept for us because, we go to the store and we buy products and we really don't think of it too much. But before machines made our clothes and all the other things that we buy, humans made it. And it cost a lot of money and it was very time consuming. Nowadays, it's very, very effective for machines to do it. And so it was more effective, and it triggered far-reaching changes in the industrialized societies. So as these machines become more and more skilled at their job, our world becomes more and more complex. So machines were invented to replace human labor, but that also means that there needs to be an energy source for these new machines. It would first start out as water, then steam and electricity, and then finally oil, which we know as gas. Some historians place advances in atomic, solar, and wind energy at the later stages of the Industrial Revolution. So there are some historians that still think that we're kind of in the Industrial Revolution, but a lot of historians think that we're what's called the post-industrial civilization. And then, of course, some countries haven't even gone through an industrial revolution at all. But that also means that we're increasing the use of metals, minerals, such as aluminum, coal, copper, iron, and so on, to make these machines and to make sure that they have energy to run. So, what happened during the Industrial Revolution? A little bit more specific is you have transportation improvements from ships. So you went from wooden ships to iron ships, and then from iron ships to steel ships. You went from wind power sails to steam power boilers. You have the invention of trains, automobiles, telegraphs, telephones, radio, which will lead into our modern day equivalent of cell phones and the internet and so on. So if it wasn't for the Industrial Revolution, you and I would not be able to have the world that we live in today. So a little background on the Industrial Revolution. It really started in the 15th, 16th, and 17th centuries. And it kind of snowballed from there. So think of it as kind of like a little snowball, and it's kind of rolling down the hill. You have Europeans expanding globally. You have increased geographical knowledge. You start to have colonies in the Americas and Asia. There's more trade going on, and you have guild systems forming, but they couldn't meet up with the demands of increased goods. And why is there an increase in goods? Well, because the population in Europe and worldwide, but especially in Europe, is growing tremendously. So what other things contributed to the Industrial Revolution? You have the Scientific Revolution of 17th and 18th centuries, and we briefly mentioned it in class, people like Newton. But mostly it's because of the intellectual revolution, writers like Locke, Voltaire, in the 17th and 18th century, So you have this idea of discovery with the scientific revolution and free intellectual inquiry in the 17th and 18th century. That's weakening superstitions and traditions and is encouraging people to learn and get better and do better things in society. So how does that translate into the Industrial Revolution? Well, let's go back a little bit. You have domestic service developed in England during this time period, before this time period, pretty much in the 16th and late 18th century. And what does that mean? You have a system which is referred to as the putting out system. And so what would happen was business owners would go with the raw materials to the workers' homes and basically drop it off. And the workers and the business owners would make an arrangement on when they want to pick it up and how much it's going to cost per item that is made. And then the business people would go away, workers would make the product, and then at the specified day, the business people would come back and pay the workers for the items that they made. But this domestic system is pretty inefficient by this time period because it can't keep up with demand. So business people are looking for ways to make more products during this time period at a cheaper price, and so they're going to turn to machines. So, where are these machines located? Most of them are going to be located in factories. So you'd have the development of these factory systems that are going to replace the domestic system. They're a faster method of production, and now all the workers are going to be located in one location. So no longer does a business person have to go to and fro. They're pretty much all located in one particular area in the factory, and production anticipated demand. So as demand increases, production increases. As demand is less, then production is less. And of course, you could hire and fire workers based on those factors. So here's a graph that kind of illustrates the differences between the domestic system and the factory system. Just briefly, domestic system, you're using hand tools, you're at home. Small hand tools usually owned by the owner. Small production, cost of living or cost of making the garment, I should say, is more. Worker makes the entire item, and so on. On the factory system, you have machines making the items. They're located in a factory. You have large, power-driven machines owned by capitalists or the business people. You have a high level of production, and they're selling their products worldwide. So that kind of gives you a rough idea of the differences between the two systems. So where did it all begin? Well, it all began in England. Even though England is a small country compared to most of Europe, it is the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution, and there are several reasons why. We're going to get to them in just a minute. But just to let you know, there's no real concrete date on the Industrial Revolution. It's not like you can pin it down like January 1st of 1750 or anything like that. It's usually pretty slow, gradual, kind of organic in that way. But then, of course, it's going to kind of speed up as we get further and further in history. But pretty much by after 1750, you do have a notable change in England, but there's things happening. So most people peg the beginning of the Industrial Revolution around 1750. So here are the factors on why England led the Industrial Revolution, and they're probably also going to be mentioned in the films that you guys are going to see. But the first one is capital. Second one is colonies and market. Third one is raw materials, then geography, merchant marine, and then finally the workers. So they might talk about these in the films or in your book slightly different, but these are the major factors of why England led the Industrial Revolution. And we're going to go through them right now. So, number one, capital. Capital basically equals money. And as we know, money makes the world go round, and people during this time period figured out if I have money, I can spend money and make a product to make more money. So money makes more money. And so you have what's called the commercial revolution. And you have during this time period a lot of English merchants making a lot of money. These merchants had the capital to invest in the factory system, to buy buildings, the machinery, and the raw materials, which are all the factors that you need pretty much to start making products. And of course, once you start making products, you sell them for a profit, and of course, you make more money. So if you have money, you can invest it and make more money. English colonies and markets. Again, during this time period, England has the most colonies than any other nation, so they're able to sell their goods and services to their colonies, and that's how they can discard some of their surplus. Its colonies gave England access to enormous markets and vast amounts of raw materials. So England is going to take over large parts of Africa, or in India and Southeast Asia, and they're going to use the raw materials that are there. They're going to take them, ship them back to England, where they're going to be processed and used in a factory, and then the out product is going to go back to the colonies to be sold as a profit. Colonies had rich textile industries for centuries, but many of the natural cloths popular today, such as calico and gingham, were originally created in India, as well as silk. So you have a lot of products that were originally established in India and China that are going to be made in England at a cheaper price. Okay, but those three raw materials are not the most important for the textile industry, and we'll talk about that in probably part 2. Raw materials. England itself possessed the necessary raw materials to create the means of production. So England has 3 main raw materials that you need to know about. First one, coal. Coal, yes, that little black rock that burns, is going to be used to power the factories, the steam engine, and pretty much the underlying power source for the Industrial Revolution. Iron. Iron is basically the building blocks to make large machines such as railroad tracks, trains, ships, you name it. It's going to be built primarily, first of all, by iron. Later on, it's going to be by steel. But during this time period, it's mostly iron. Let's see. Another reason why England led the way is workers. Serfdom and guilds had ended early in England, as opposed to other areas like Germany and Russia and France. English people could freely travel from the countryside to the cities. Again, during this time period, England is a constitutional monarch, where most places in Europe are not. They're still under the feudal system for the most part in a lot of places, and people are not able to move back and forth freely. And of course, when people can't move back and forth freely, then their trade's going to go down, economics is going to go down, the expression of ideas is going to collapse in those countries if people aren't allowed to move around. And that's exactly what happens in Europe, except for in England. And then you have something called the enclosure movement. Caused many small farmers to lose their lands, and these former farmers increased the labor source. So you have this time period in England where a lot of small farmers are going to lose their land to big, huge, essentially companies that are going to take over the land. And so where do those farmers go to work? They start heading to the cities. And because they figure, well, I can find work in the cities because it's not going to be here for me any longer because I just lost my farm. So you have a dramatic increase of people moving to the cities looking for work. Last couple of reasons why England led the Industrial Revolution. You have what's known as the merchant marine. You have a large naval presence with the English. They are the number one country that has a navy during this time period. but that also means they have something called a large merchant marines, which are ships that are carrying goods and services back and forth from one country to another. And the merchant marine is built upon this idea of commercial revolution, of taking their products to where their destination is, and they can do that for a very cheap price because they're moving everything in bulk across the oceans through this merchant marine class. Vast number of ships could bring raw materials and finished goods to and from English colonies and possessions, as well as to and from other countries. Again, just mention that. That's basically saying that they're able to trade pretty freely during this time period. Government's not getting involved too much. And so they're able to move goods back and forth fairly easy. Geography. England is the political center of Great Britain, which is an island. Great Britain, as the entire island was called, beginning in 1707, did not suffer fighting on its land during the wars of the 18th century. So, while most countries were at war during this time period, England was not. England had a... So the last major factor of why England led the Industrial Revolution was because of its geography. England is the political center of Great Britain, and of course Great Britain is an island. The island, or Great Britain itself, didn't really suffer from a lot of infighting during this time period, unlike other countries like we've seen France, who was all over the place because of the French Revolution and Napoleon taking over all these other European countries. France didn't. France had all those problems. England did not. It was a very stable country. Also, they had no internal trade barriers, kind of like here in the United States. So even though they had districts or boroughs or areas where they were different, they didn't have taxes in between those areas. And also, let's see, it's an island nation, so it has excellent harbors and ports, which are important for its navy. And finally, the weather's a little damp. So by being a little damp, people need more clothes, which again helps spur the Industrial Revolution, first in the textile industry. So, saying all that, this pretty much ends part 1 of my discussion on the Industrial Revolution. Part 2 will be primarily about early inventions of the Industrial Revolution and how they helped out in certain important aspects of life for people during this time period. Thanks for listening. So, as the quote says, necessity is the mother of all inventions. So, just to give you an example of how this all came about, you have spinning machines need to speed up weaving, and so you built something called the power loom. So, you had humans doing it, but humans were doing it too slow. They weren't keeping up with demand. So somebody out there said, aha, I got an idea. Why don't we speed up the production of people making more thread by building a machine? And that's what people did, is they built machines to replace humans.